welcome everyone. You're in for such a treat, and you're getting a treat every time we have a Celebrate Piano event. You don't even have to worry about it. And Stephen is no exception. I've known this kid since he was 8. I say kid because he's like half my age. but I've known him since he was 8, and he kept winning everything he ever entered. In Spokane, and all of our kids went there and said, "Why do we have to play when Stephen Buse is playing?" Because he would win everything, and he's just the greatest person. He's given wonderful master classes. And a little item of business from Dr. Hahn about a chance to win CDs after intermission.
Absolutely. So I should just make mention that Stephen was part of our UM Keyboard Society, which is an event that we host every year for our piano students. It's an opportunity for actually Stephen and I to sit here and get lessons as well, while Stephen or whomever works with our lucky students. So it's a real special treat. You can only imagine how inspiring that would be for these young students of ours to get the chance to have input from such a master performer as you'll hear. Perfect timing, if you would.
Well, wouldn't you know?
That was actually on cue.
Yes. He wants you to shut off your phones. Okay.
Please turn off your phone. While I have my phone out, if you would, at some point, go onto our Facebook page, Celebrate Piano series, and just like us. It's kind of in progress right now, but then you'll be apprised of things that we're doing into the future as we get our new artists and series up and running. We are doing another insert in the program if you feel like going old school and filling that out, letting us know how you heard about us, and we can be in touch with you that way. We will do a drawing, as we now do at these events, at intermission, and we will give away 1 or 2 of Stephen's CDs. They are also available for sale at intermission and after the concert. He only brought, he's so modest, he brought like 12. So
the first 12 customers.
So they're $20 a piece. Stephen will sign them for you gladly. He's a gracious and wonderful individual, and I think that will be born in his playing for sure.
And ask for your little insert. If you're already on our mailing list or our email list or both, and you'd like to be on only one, just kind of let us know, write comments. But if you're on that list, just give us your name so we know who won the CD. But if you're not on the list yet, then give us your name and address and email, and we'll just keep notifying you for other great events.
Absolutely.
So we're thrilled that you're here, and you will be thrilled that you're here.
Absolutely. Enjoy. Welcome, Stephen Buse.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here in Missoula playing on this magnificent Steinway. I'd like to take a second to introduce the next two pieces on the program. The next two pieces were written by the Hungarian composer Franz Liszt. Often when we think of Liszt, the first thing that comes to mind is this sort of Elvis Presley character. And certainly he was treated like a rock star. We know the stories of women following him into restaurants, and when he was done, taking the dregs of his wine glass and pouring them into a little vial and putting it on a necklace. And this was a treasured possession. And there are other stories that I won't share because this is a family event. So many stories about Liszt, and I'm sure there was a time in his life when he encouraged this kind of attention as well. But Liszt lived well into his 70s, and a lot happened in his life, and I think we sometimes tend to judge Liszt's entire life based on some flashy years in his 20s. So tonight, or this afternoon, I'd like to play two works of Liszt that I think show a more personal side to his character. This first piece I'm going to play is called The Bells of Geneva, and this piece was written when Liszt was in his mid-20s, and it was written shortly after the birth of his first child, a daughter named Blondine, and he dedicated this piece to her. And the piece is in B major, and for Liszt, B major represented heaven. And the entire piece is in B major. Every section of the piece is in B major. He modulates briefly, but then he goes back to B major. And in case anybody missed it, he ends the piece with 6 B major chords, one after another. And it's this beautiful, exquisite tribute to his daughter, this idea that Liszt has found heaven with the birth of his daughter. So this is the Bells of Geneva. And the second piece of Liszt that I'd like to play that shows this more personal side to his character is his set of variations on a theme of Bach. This set of variations was written about 27 years after the Bells of Geneva. At this time, Blondine was 27 years old, and actually it was when she was 27 that she died. And it was around that same time that Liszt's son Daniel also died. So it was really a tragic time for Liszt. And it was shortly after their deaths that he wrote this set of variations. And it's believed that this piece expresses his anguish and his torment over losing his children. This piece is considered one of Liszt's greatest masterpieces, but it's not played very much. In fact, I heard it for the first time myself less than 2 years ago, and I was bewildered by the dissonance and the raw emotion of it. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about the piece, sort of what Liszt does throughout these variations, so you can follow it along. It starts with a loud introduction, which lasts about 15 seconds, and then we have the variations that start. And the variations are based on this theme by Bach, which goes like this. So these 8 notes, Liszt bases his entire 14-minute masterpiece on these 8 notes. Everything can be answered back in some way to those 8 notes. So we have the introduction, and then we have the theme. And in this first part of the piece, Liszt repeats the theme 48 times, but in such a way that you're not really aware of it most of the time. Much of the time you can't even hear it. So don't try to count them. That's not the point. What's actually interesting is everything else that Liszt does around these sort of self-imposed confines. So listen for the different emotions, the different musical colors from the piano as Liszt goes through these 48 repetitions of the theme. Usually the theme is in the bass. So after about 7 minutes, those 48 variations are done. And then the second half is more of a fantasy. Liszt writes kind of variations, loose variations on this idea, maybe the abstract idea of the theme, which basically is descending and it's basically chromatic. And so the second half, we don't really hear the theme at all, but generally speaking, it's descending and it's chromatic. And in general, the second half, there are far fewer notes. The first half kind of builds up a lot. The second half explores this more intimate side to the sound. And then it builds up to a climax at the end of that section. And the last thing I want to mention is the very ending. Typically with variations, you expect to hear the theme at the beginning, then you hear all the variations, and then at the end, the composer brings back the theme in its original simplicity. So we kind of expect to hear the theme again at the end after this abstract fantasy stuff. But Liszt does something almost exactly opposite. Instead of bringing back the theme, he ends the piece with a hymn, with a chorale. And you'll notice that it's very different from the theme. The theme descends and is chromatic. This hymn is consonant and it ascends. And the hymn is significant. The words to the title of the hymn is "What God Has Done is Well Done." And it sort of represents Liszt's coming spiritually to terms with the loss of his 2 children. And I think it represents redemption and peace of some kind. So the piece begins with a loud introduction. We then it gets soft, and we have 48 repetitions of the theme, but don't count them. And then we have this sort of free fantasy on the theme, and then it ends with the hymn. This next piece I'm going to play was written by Israeli-American composer Ron Yedidia, who is now in his early 50s, I believe. Mr. Yedidia was born in Israel and moved to this country as a young man. He attended Juilliard, and now he teaches at a conservatory in New York, and he writes a great deal of music, fills a lot of commissions, and he writes a lot of piano music, which I'm very happy about because it's really wonderful. This particular etude is called The Flight Over the Ocean. Several months ago, I played this piece in Houston for a group of children, and I was trying to get the kids engaged, and I told them that the end of this piece is quite tumultuous, and I told them that they could decide if they thought the end of the piece sort of represented the intense excitement of flying over the ocean, as the title suggests, or if this tumultuous ending actually represents a plane crash. And I chose not to be offended that most of the kids thought it sounded like a plane crash. I'll let you decide for yourself. This is Ron Yedidia's Flight Over the Ocean. My favorite response to that piece was someone who said they didn't think it was a plane crash, they didn't think it was the ecstasy of flying over the ocean, but rather the tumult at the end represented what happens on board the plane when it's announced that they are all out of Dr. Pepper. So there are many ways to hear music. This next piece I'm going to play was written by the Estonian composer Arvo Pärt. It's called For Elina. Elina was a young woman who Arvo Pärt knew. She was going off to college, and he wrote this piece for her on the occasion of her going to college. The piece is only about 2.5 minutes. It's very short, and there are never more than 2 notes being played at a single time. In fact, it might be the fewest notes of any piece I've played in the last 25 years. But it's fascinating, I think. But what's interesting about these 2 notes and what they represent, these 2 notes, they come close to each other on the keyboard, but they never hit the same note. They come close, they get more distant, but they never connect. And it represents this idea that around us there are people whose lives are going on that somehow mirror our own, but we never meet them. And we're just sort of, in an isolated way, living our lives. And I think there's an underlying message that we're not meant to be isolated, that somehow if these notes were to connect, something beautiful would happen. And it's kind of an interesting idea, and I think a very beautiful piece, and I hope you enjoy it. And the last piece I'm going to play is a Second Hungarian Rhapsody of Franz Liszt. Liszt wrote this piece in the middle of the 19th century, and it was a difficult piece. The 20th century Russian virtuoso Vladimir Horowitz decided that Liszt's version didn't have enough notes. So he added some of his own, and I'll be playing Horowitz's version of this piece. And if you watched as many Bugs Bunny cartoons as I have, you will recognize some of these tunes. Thank you.